Chapter 13 of Montezuma's Daughter by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Patrick79. Chapter 13 The Stone of Sacrifice. At length the morning broke, and found me in a sorry plight, for my face was swollen to the size of a pumpkin by the venom of the mosquitoes, and the rest of my body was in little better shape. Moreover, I could not keep myself still because of the itching, but must run and jump like a madman. And where was I to run to through the swamp, in which I could see no shelter or sign of man? I could not guess, so since I must keep moving, I followed the bank of the river, as I walked disturbing many crocodiles and loathsome snakes. Now I knew I could not live long in such suffering, and determined to struggle forward till I fell down insensible, and death put an end to my torments. For an hour or more I went on thus till I came to a place that was clear of bush and reeds. Across this I skipped and danced, striking with my swollen hands at the gnats which buzzed about my head. Now the end was not far off, for I was exhausted and near to falling, when suddenly I came upon a party of men, brown in colour and clothed with white garments, who had been fishing in the river. By them on the water were several canoes in which were loads of merchandise, and they were now engaged in eating. So soon as these men caught sight of me, they uttered exclamations in an unknown tongue, and seizing weapons that lay by them, bows and arrows and wooden clubs set on either side with spikes of flinty glass, they made towards me as though to kill me. Now I lifted up my hands praying for mercy, and seeing that I was unarmed and helpless, the men laid down their arms and addressed me. I shook my head to show that I could not understand, and pointed first to the sea and then to my swollen features. They nodded, and going to one of the canoes, a man brought from it a paste of a brown colour and aromatic smell. Then by signs he directed me to remove such garments as remained on me, the fashion of which seemed to puzzle them greatly. This being done, they proceeded to anoint my body with the paste, the touch of which gave me a most blessed relief from my intolerable itching and burning, and moreover rendered my flesh distasteful to the insects, for after that they plagued me little. When I was anointed they offered me food, fried fish and cakes of meal, together with a most delicious hot drink covered with a brown and foaming froth that I learned to know afterwards as chocolate. When I had finished eating, having talked a while together in low tones, they motioned me to enter one of the canoes, giving me mats to lie on. I obeyed, and 3 other men came with me, for the canoe was large. One of these, a very grave man with a gentle face and a manner whom I took to be the chief of the party, sat down opposite to me, and the other 2 placing themselves in the bow and stern of the boat, which they drove along by means of paddles. Then we started, followed by 3 other canoes, and before we had gone a mile utter weariness overpowered me, and I fell asleep. I awoke much refreshed, having slept many hours, for now the sun was setting, and was astonished to find the grave-looking man my companion in the canoe, keeping watch over my sleep, and warding the gnats from me with a leafy branch. His kindness seemed to show that I was in no danger of ill treatment, and my fears on that point being set at rest, I began to wonder as to what strange land I had come, and who its people might be. Soon, however, I gave over having nothing to build on, and observed the scenery instead. Now we were paddling up a smaller river than the one the banks of which I had been cast away on, and were no longer in the midst of marshes. On either side of us was land, open land, or rather land that would have been open had it not been for the great trees, larger than the largest oak, which grew upon it, some of them of surpassing beauty. Up these trees climbed creepers that hung like ropes, even from the topmost boughs, and among them were many strange and gorgeous flowering plants that seemed to cling to the bark, as moss clings to a wall. In their branches also sat harsh-voiced birds of brilliant colours, and apes that barked and chattered as we went by. Just as the sun set over this strange new scene, the canoes came to a landing place built of timber, and we disembarked. Now it grew dark suddenly, and all I could discover was that I was being led along a good road. Presently we reached a gate, which from the barking of dogs and the number of people who thronged about it, I judged to be the entrance of a town, and passing it, we advanced down a long street with houses on either side. At the doorway of the last house my companion halted, and taking me by the hand, led me into the long low-lit room with lamps of earthenware. Here some women came forward and kissed him, while others, whom I took to be servants, saluted him by touching the floor with one hand. Soon, however, all eyes were turned on me, and many eager questions were asked of the chief, of which I could only guess the purpose. When all had gazed their fill, supper was served, a rich meal of many strange meats, and of this I was invited to partake, which I did, seated on a mat and eating off the dishes that were placed on the ground by the women. Among these I noticed one girl who far surpassed all the others in grace, though none were unpleasing to the eye. She was dark, indeed, but her features were regular and eyes were fine. Her figure was tall and straight, and the sweetness of her face added to the charm of her beauty. I mention this girl for two reasons. First, because she saved me once from sacrifice and once from torture, and secondly, because she was none other than that woman who afterwards became known as Marina, the mistress of Cortes, without whose aid he had never conquered Mexico. But at this time she did not guess that it was her destiny to bring her country of Anahuac beneath the cruel yoke of the Spaniard. From the moment of my entry I saw that Marina, as I will still call her, for her Indian name is too long to be written, took pity on my forlorn state, and did what lay in her power to protect me from vulgar curiosity and to minister to my wants. It was she who brought me water to wash in, and a clean robe of linen to replace my foul and tattered garments, and a cloak fashioned of bright feathers for my shoulders. When the supper was done, a mat was given to me to sleep on in a little room apart, and here I lay down, thinking that though I might be lost for ever in my own world, at least I had fallen among people who were gentle and kindly, and moreover, as I saw from many tokens, no savages. One thing, however, disturbed me. I discovered that though I was well treated, also I was a prisoner, for a man armed with a copper spear slept across the doorway of my little room. Before I lay down, I looked through the wooden bars which served as a protection to the window pane, and saw that the house stood upon the border of a large open space, in the midst of which a great pyramid towered 100 feet or more in the air. On the top of this pyramid was a building of stone that I took to be a temple, and rightly, in front of which a fire burned. Marvelling what the purpose of this great work might be, and in honour of what faith it was erected, I went to sleep. On the morrow I was to learn. Here it may be convenient for me to state what I did not discover till afterwards, that I was in the city of Tabasco, the capital of one of the southern provinces of Anahuac, which is situated at a distance of some hundreds of miles from the central city of Tenochtitlan, or Mexico. The river where I had been cast away was the Rio de Tabasco, where Cortes landed in the following year, and my host, or rather my captor, was the cacique of Chief of Tabasco, the same man who subsequently presented Marina to Cortes. Thus it came about that, with the exception of a certain Aguilar, who with some companions was wrecked on the coast of Yucatan 6 years before, I was the first white man who had ever dwelt among the Indians. This Aguilar was rescued by Cortes, though his companions were all sacrificed to Huitzil, the horrible war god of the country. But the name of the Spaniards was already known to the Indians, who looked on them with superstitious fear, for in the year previous to my being cast away, the hidalgo Hernandez de Cordova had visited the coast of Yucatan, and fought several battles with the natives, and earlier in the same year of my arrival, Juan de Grigalva had come to this very river of Tabasco. Thus it came about that I was set down as one of the strange new nation of Teules, as the Indians named the Spaniards, and therefore as an enemy of whose blood the gods were thirsting. I awoke at dawn, much refreshed with sleep, and having washed and clothed myself in the linen robes that were provided for me, I came into the large room where food was given me. Scarcely had I finished my meal when my captor, the cacique, entered accompanied by 2 men whose appearance struck terror in my heart. In countenance they were fierce and horrible. They wore black robes embroidered with mystic characters in red, and their long and tangled hair was matted together with some strange substance. These men, whom all present, including the chief or cacique, seemed to look on with utmost reverence, glared at me with a fierce glee that made my blood run cold. One of them, indeed, tore open my white robe and placed his filthy hand upon my heart, which beat quickly enough, counting its throbs aloud, while the others nodded at his words. Afterwards I learned that he was saying that I was very strong. Glancing round to find the interpretation of this act upon the faces of those about me, my eyes caught those of the girl Marina, and there was that in them which left me in little doubt. Horror and pity were written there, and I knew that some dreadful death overshadowed me. Before I could do anything, before I could even think, I was seized by the priests, or pabas as the Indians name them, and dragged from the room, all of the household following us except Marina and the cacique. Now I found myself in a great square or market-place bordered by many fine houses of white stone and lime, and some of mud, which was filling rapidly with a vast number of people, men, women and children, who all stared at me as I went towards the pyramid on the top of which the fire burned. At the foot of this pyramid I was led into a little chamber hollowed in its thickness, and here my dress was torn from me by the priests, leaving me naked except for a cloth about my loins and a chaplet of bright flowers which was set upon my head. In this chamber were 3 other men, Indians, who from the horror on their faces I judged to be also doomed to death. Presently a drum began to beat high above us, and we were taken to the chamber and placed in a procession of many priests, I being the first among the victims. Then the priests set up a chant, and we began to ascent of the pyramid, following a road that wound round and round its bulk till it ended in a platform at its summit, which may have measured 40 paces in the square. Hence the view of the surrounding country was very fine, but in that hour I scarcely noticed it, having no care for prospects, however pleasing. On the further side of the platform were 2 wooden towers 50 feet or so in height. These were the temples of the gods, Huitzel of war and Quetzal, god of air, whose hideous effigies carved in stone grinned at us through the open doorways. In the chambers of these temples stood small altars, and on the altars were large dishes of gold containing the hearts of those who had been sacrificed on the yesterday. These chambers, moreover, were encrusted with every sort of filth. In front of the temples stood the altar whereupon the fire burned eternally, and before it were a hog-backed block of black marble of the size of an inn drinking table, and a great carven stone shaped like a wheel measuring some 10 feet across, with a copper ring in its centre. All of these things I remembered afterwards, though at the time I scarcely seemed to see them, for hardly were we arrived on the platform when I was seized and dragged to the wheel-shaped stone. Here a hide girdle was put round my waist, and secured to the ring by a rope long enough to enable me to run to the edge of the stone and no further. Then a flint-pointed spear was given to me, and spears were given also to the 2 captives who accompanied me, and it was made clear to me by the signs that I must fight with them, it being their part to leap upon the stone and mine to defend it. Now I thought that if I could kill these 2 poor creatures, perhaps I myself should be allowed to go free, and so to save my life I prepared to take theirs if I could. Presently the head priest gave a signal commanding the 2 men to attack me, but they were so lost in fear that they did not even stir. Then the priest began to flog them with leather girdles, till at length, crying out with pain, they ran at me. One reached the stone and leapt upon it a little before the other, and I struck the spear through his arm. Instantly he dropped his weapon and fled, and the other man fled also, for there was no fight in them, nor would any flogging bring them to face me again. Seeing that they could not make them brave, the priest determined to have done with them. Amidst a great noise of music and chanting, he whom I had smitten was seized and dragged to the hog-backed block of marble, which in turn was a stone of sacrifice. On this he was cast down, breast upwards, and held by 5 priests, 2 gripping his hands, 2 his legs, and 1 his head. Then, having donned a scarlet robe, the head priest, that same who felt my heart, uttered some kind of prayer, and raising a curved knife of the flint-like glass, or istle, struck open the poor wretch's breast in a single blow, and made the ancient offering to the sun. As he did this, all the multitude in the place below, in full view of whom this bloody game was played, prostrated themselves, remaining on their knees till the offering had been thrown into the golden censer before the statue of the god Huitzel. Thereupon the horrible priests, casting themselves on the body, carried it with shouts to the edge of the pyramid or teocalli, and rolled it down the steep sides. At the foot of the slope it was lifted and borne away by certain men who were waiting, for what purpose I did not know at that time. Scarcely was the first victim dead when the second was seized and treated in like fashion, the multitude prostrating themselves as before, and then last of all came my turn. I felt myself seized, and my senses swam, for I did not recover them till I found myself lying on the accursed stone, the priests dragging at my limbs and head, and my breast strained upwards till the skin was stretched tight as that of a drum, while over me stood the human devil in his red mantle, the glass knife in his hand. Oh, never shall I forget his wicked face, maddened with the lust of blood, or for the glare in his eyes as he tossed back his matted locks. But he did not strike at once. He gloated over me, pricking me with the point of the knife. It seemed to me that I lay there for years, while the pabber aimed and pointed with the knife. But at last, through a mist that gathered before my eyes, I saw it flash upwards. Then when I thought that my hour had come, a hand caught his arm in mid-air and held it, and I heard a voice whispering. What was said did not please the priest, for suddenly he howled aloud and made a dash towards me to kill me, but once again his arm was caught before the knife fell. Then he withdrew into the temple of the god Quetzal, and for a long while I lay upon the stone, suffering the agonies of 100 deaths, for I believed that it was determined to torture me before I died, and that my slaughter had been stayed for this purpose. There I lay upon the stone, the fierce sunlight beating on my breast, while from below came the faint murmur of the thousands of the wondering people. All my life seemed to pass before me as I was stretched upon the awful bed. 100 little things which I had forgotten came back to me, and with them memories of childhood, of my oath to my father, of Lily's farewell kiss and words, of de Garcia's face as I was hurled into the sea, of the death of Isabella Siguenza, and lastly a vague wonder as to why all priests were so cruel. At length I heard footsteps and shut my eyes, for I could not bear the sight of that dreadful knife no longer. But behold, no knife fell. Suddenly my hands were loosed and I was lifted to my feet, on which I had never hoped to stand again. Then I was borne to the edge of the teocalli, for I could not walk, and here my would-be murderer, the priest, having first shouted some words to the spectators below, that caused them to murmur like a forest when the wind stirs it, clasped me in his blood-stained arms and kissed me on the forehead. Now it was for the first time that I noticed my captor, the cacique, standing at my side, grave, courteous, and smiling. As he had smiled when he handed me to the papas, so he smiled when he took me back from them. Then, having been cleansed and clothed, I was led into the sanctuary of the god Quetzal, and stood face to face with the hideous image there, staring at the golden censer that was to have received my heart while the priest uttered prayers. Thence I was supported down the winding road of the pyramid till I came to its foot, where my captor, the cacique, took me by the hand and led me through the people who, it seemed now, regarded me with some sort of strange veneration. The first person that I saw when we reached the house was Marina, who looked at me and murmured soft words that I could not understand. Then I was suffered to go to my chamber, and there I passed the rest of the day, prostrated by all that I had undergone. Truly, I had come to the land of devils. And now I will tell you how it was that I came to be saved from the knife. Marina, having taken some liking to me, pitied my sad fate, and being very quick-witted, she found a way to rescue me. For when I had been led off to sacrifice, she spoke to the cacique, her lord, bringing it to his mind that, by common report, Montezuma, the emperor of Anahuac, was disturbed as to the Teules or Spaniards, and desired much to see one. Now, she said, I was evidently a Teule, and Montezuma would be angered, indeed, if I were sacrificed in a far-off town, instead of being sent to him to sacrifice if he saw fit. To this the cacique answered that the words were wise, but that she should have spoken them before, for now the priests had got hold of me, and it was hopeless to save me from their grip. Nay, answered Marina, there is this to be said. Quetzal, the god of whom this Teule is to be offered, was a white man, and it may well happen that this man is one of his children. Will it please the god that his child should be offered to him? At the least, If the god is not angered, Montezuma will certainly be wroth and wreak his vengeance on you and all the priests." Now when the cacique heard of this he saw that Marina spoke truth, and hurrying up the teocalli he caught the knife as it was in the act of falling upon me. At first the head priest was angered and called out that this was sacrilege, but when the cacique told him his mind, he understood that he would do wisely not to run a risk of the wrath of Montezuma. So I was loosed and led into the sanctuary, and when I came out, the pabber announced to the people that the god had declared me to be one of his children, and it was for this reason that then and thereafter they treated me with reverence. End of chapter 13. Recording by Patrick 79. Chapter 14 of Montezuma's Daughter by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Patrick 79. Chapter 14. The Saving of Guatemoc. Now after this dreadful day I was kindly dealt with by the people of Tabasco, who gave me the name of Teule, or Spaniard, and no longer sought to put me to sacrifice. Far from it indeed. I was well clothed and fed, and suffered to wander where I would, though always under the care of guards who, had I escaped, would have paid for it with their lives. I learned that on the morrow of my rescue from the priest, messengers were dispatched to Montezuma, the great king, acquainting him with the history of my capture, and seeking to know his pleasure concerning me. But the way of the Tenochtitlan was far, and many weeks passed before the messengers returned again. Meanwhile I filled the days in learning with the Maya language, and also something of that of the Aztecs, which I practised with Marina and others. For Marina was not a Tabascan, having been born at Panaya, on the southeastern border of the empire, but her mother sold her to merchants in order that Marina's inheritance might come to another child of hers by a second marriage, and thus in the end the girl fell into the hands of the cacique of Tabasco. Also I learned something of the history and customs, and of the picture writing of the land, and how to read it, and moreover I obtained great repute among the Tabascans by the skill of my medicine, so that in time they grew to believe that I was indeed the child of Quetzal, the good god. And the more I studied this people, the less I could understand of them. In most ways they were equal to any nation of our own world, of which I had knowledge. None are more skilled in the arts, few are better architects, or boast purer laws. Moreover, they were brave and had patience. But their faith was the canker of the root of the tree. In precept it was noble and had much in common with our own, such as the rite of baptism. But I have told what it was in practice. And yet, when all is said, is it more cruel to offer up victims to the gods than to torture them in the vaults of the Holy Office, or to immure them in the walls of the nunneries? When I had lived a month in Tabasco, I had learned enough of the language to talk with Marina, with whom I grew friendly, though no more, and it was from her that I gathered the most of my knowledge, and also many hints as to the conduct necessary to my safety. In return I taught her something of my own faith, and of the customs of the Europeans, and it was the knowledge that she gained from me which afterwards made her so useful to the Spaniards, and prepared her to accept their religion, giving her insight into the ways of the white people. So I abode for 4 months or more in the house of the cacique of Tabasco, who carried his kindness towards me to the length of offering me his sister in marriage. To this proposal I said no, as gently as I might, and he marvelled at it, for the girl was fair. Indeed, so well was I treated, that had it not been that my heart was far away, and because of the horrible rites of their religion, which I was forced to witness almost daily, I could have learned to love this gentle, skilled, and industrious people. At length, when full 4 months had passed away, the messengers returned from the court of Montezuma, having been much delayed by swollen rivers and other accidents of travel. So great was the importance that the emperor attached to the fact of my capture, and so desirous was he to see me at his capital, that he had sent his own nephew, the Prince Guatemoc, to fetch me and a great escort of warriors with him. Oh, never shall I forget my first meeting with this prince, who afterward became my dear companion and brother in arms. When the escort arrived, I was away from the town shooting deer with the bow and arrow, a weapon in the use of which I had much skill, that all the Indians wondered at me, not knowing that twice I had won the prize at the butts of Bungay Common. Our party being summoned by a messenger, we returned bearing our deer with us. On reaching the courtyard of the cacique's house, I found it filled with warriors most gorgeously attired, and among them one more splendid than the rest. He was young, very tall and broad, most handsome in face, and having eyes like those of an eagle, while his whole aspect breathed majesty and command. His body was encased in a cuirass of gold, over which hung a mantle made of the most gorgeous feathers, exquisitely set in a band of different colours. On his head he wore a helmet of gold, surmounted by the royal crest, an eagle, standing on a snake fashioned in gold and gems. On his arms and beneath his knees he wore circlets of gold and gem, and in his hand was a copper-bladed spear. Round this man were many nobles dressed in somewhat similar fashion, except that most of them wore a vest of quilted cotton in place of the gold cuirass, and a jewelled panache of the plumes of birds instead of the royal symbol. This was Guatemoc, Montezuma's nephew, and afterwards the last emperor of Anahuac. So soon as I saw him, I saluted him in the Indian fashion by touching the earth with my right hand, which I raised to my head. But Guatemoc, having scanned me with his eyes as I stood, attired in my simple hunter's dress, smiled frankly and said, "Surely, Teule, if I know anything of the looks of men, we are too equal in our birth, as in our age, for you to salute me as a slave greets his master." And he held his hand to me. I took it, answering with the help of Marina, who was watching this great lord with eager eyes. "It may be so, prince, but though in my country I am a man of repute and wealth, here I am nothing but a slave snatched from the sacrifice." "I know it," he said, frowning. "It is well for all here that you were so snatched before the breath of life left you, else Montezuma's wrath had fallen on this city." And he looked at the cacique, who trembled. Such in those days was the terror of the Montezuma's name. Then he asked me if I was a Teule or a Spaniard. I told him that I was no Spaniard, but one of another white race who had Spanish blood in his veins. This saying seemed to puzzle him, for he had never so much as heard of any other white race. So I told him something of my story, at least so much of it as had to do with my being cast away. When I finished, he said, "If I understood right, Teule, you say that you are no Spaniard, yet you have Spanish blood in you, and came hither in a Spanish ship, and I find this story strange." "Well, it is for Montezuma to judge of these matters, so let us talk no more of them. Come and show me how you handle the great bow of yours. Did you bring it with you, or did you fashion it here? They tell me, Teule, that there is no such archer in the land. So I came up and showed him the bow which was of my own make, and would shoot an arrow some 60 paces further than any I saw in Anahuac, and we fell into talk on matters of sport and war, Marina helping out my language, and before that day was done we had grown friendly. For a week the Prince Guatemoc and his company rested in the town of Tabasco, and all this time we talked, the three of us, much together. Soon I saw that Marina looked with eyes of longing on the great lord, partly because of his beauty, rank and might, and partly because she wearied of her captivity in the house of the cacique, and would share Guatemoc's power, for Marina was ambitious. She tried to win the hearts in many ways, but he seemed not to notice her, so that at last she spoke more plainly and in my hearing. "You go hence tomorrow, Prince," she said softly, "and I have a favour to ask of you, if you will listen to your handmaid." "Speak on, maiden," he answered. "I would ask this, if it pleases you. You will buy me off the cacique, my master, or command him to give me up to you, and take me with you to Tenochtitlan." Guatemoc laughed aloud. "You put things plainly, maiden," he said, "but know that in the city of Tenochtitlan my wife and royal cousin Tecuichpo awaits me, and with her 3 other ladies, who as it chances are somewhat jealous." Now Marina flushed beneath her brown skin, and for the first and last time I saw her gentle eyes grow hard with anger as she answered, "I asked you to take me with you, Prince. I did not ask to be your wife or love." "But perchance you meant it," he said dryly. "Whatever I may have meant, Prince, it is now forgotten. I wish to see the great city and the great king, because I weary of my life here and would myself grow great. You have refused me, but perhaps a time will come when I shall grow great in spite of you, and then I may remember the shame that has been put upon me against you, Prince, and all your royal house." Again Guatemoc laughed, then of a sudden grew stern. "You are over bold, girl," he said. "For less words than these many a one might find herself stretched upon the stone of sacrifice. But I will forget them, for your woman's pride is stung, and you know not what you say. Do you forget them also, Teule, if you have understood." Then Marina turned and went, her bosom heaving with anger and outraged love or pride, and as she passed me I heard her mutter, "Yes, Prince, you may forget, but I shall not." Often since that day I have wondered if some vision of the future entered into the girl's breast in that hour, or if in her wrath she spoke at random. I have wondered also whether this scene between her and Guatemoc had anything to do with the history of her after-life, or did Marina, as she avowed to me in the days to come, bring shame and ruin on her country for the love of Cortes alone? It is hard to say, and perhaps these things had nothing to do with what followed, for when great events have happened, we are apt to search our causes for them in the past that were no cause. This may have been but a passing mood of hers, and one soon put out of mind, for it is certain that few build up the temples of their lives upon some firm foundation of hope or hate, of despair or desire, though it has happened to me to do so, but rather take chance for their architect, and indeed, whether they take him or no, he is still the master builder. Still, that Marina did not forget this talk I know, for in after terms I heard her remind the very prince of these words that had passed between them, aye, and heard his noble answer to her. Now I have but one more thing to tell of my stay in Tabasco, and then let me on to Mexico, and to the tale of how Montezuma's daughter became my wife, and of my further dealings with de Garcia. On the day of our departure, a great sacrifice of slaves was held upon the teocalli to propitiate the gods, so that they might give us a safe journey, and also in honour of some festival, for to the festivals of the Indians there was no end. Thither we went up the sides of the steep pyramid, since I must look upon these horrors daily. When all was prepared, and we stood around the stone of the sacrifice, while the multitude watched below, that fierce Papa, who once had felt the beatings of my heart, came forth from the sanctuary of god Quetzal, and signed to his companions to stretch the first of the victims on the stone. Then of a sudden the Prince Guatemoc stepped forward, and addressing the priests, pointed to their chief and said, "Seize that man!" They hesitated, for though he who commanded was a prince of the royal blood, to lay hands upon a high priest was sacrilege. Then with a smile Guatemoc drew forth a ring having a dull blue stone set in its bezel, on which was engraved a strange device. With the ring he drew out also a scroll of picture writing, and held them before the eyes of the Papas. Now the ring was the ring of Montezuma, and the scroll was signed by the great high priest of Tenochtitlan. And those who looked on the ring and the scroll knew well that to disobey the mandate of him who bore them was death and dishonour in one. So without more ado they seized their chief and held him. Then Guatemoc spoke again, and shortly, "Lay him on the stone and sacrifice him to the god Quetzal." Now he who had spoken such fierce joy in the death of others on this stone began to tremble and weep, for he did not desire to drink of his own medicine. "Why must I be offered up, O prince?" he cried, "I who have been faithful servant of the gods to the emperor?" "Because you dare to try to offer up this Teule," answered Guatemoc, pointing to me, "without leave from your master Montezuma, and because of other evils that you have done, all of which are written in this scroll. The Teule is a son of Quetzal, as you yourself have declared, and Quetzal will be avenged because of his son. Away with him. Here is your warrant." Then the priests, who till this moment had been his servants, dragged their chief to the stone, and there, notwithstanding his prayers and bellowings, one who had donned his mantle practised his own art upon him, and presently his body was cast down the side of the pyramid. For my part, I am not sufficient of a Christian to pretend that I was sorry to see him die in that same fashion by which he caused the death of so many better men. When it was done, Guatemoc turned to me and said, "So shall perish your enemies, my friend Teule." Within an hour of this event, which revealed to me how great was the power of Montezuma, seeing that the sight of a ring from his finger could bring about the instant death of a high priest at the hands of his disciples, we started on our long journey. But before I went, I bid a warm farewell to my friend the cacique, and also to Marina, who wept at my going. The cacique I never saw again, but Marina I did. For a whole month we travelled, for the way was far and the road rough, and sometimes we must cut our path through the forest, and sometimes we must wait upon the banks of rivers. Many were the strange sights that I saw upon that journey, and many the cities in which we sojourned in much state and honour, but I cannot stop to tell of all these. One thing I will relate, however, though briefly, because it changed the regard that the Prince Guatemoc and I felt one to the other into a friendship which lasted till his death, and indeed endures in my heart to this hour. One day we were delayed by the banks of a swollen river, and in pastime went out to hunt for deer. When we had hunted a while and killed 3 deer, It chanced that Guatemoc perceived a buck standing on a hillock, and we set out to stalk it, 5 of us in all. But the buck was in the open, and the trees and bush ceased a full 100 yards away from where he stood, so that there was no way by which we might draw near to him. Then Guatemoc began to mock me, saying, "Now, Teule, they tell of your archery, and this deer is thrice as far as we Aztecs can make sure of killing. Let us see your skill." "Oh, I will try," I answered, "though the shot is long." So we drew beneath the cover of the ceiba tree, of which the lowest branches drooped to within 15 feet of the ground, and having set an arrow on the string of the great bow that I had fashioned after the shape of those we use in merry England, I aimed and drew it. Straight sped the arrow and struck the buck fair, passing through its heart, and a low murmur of wonderment went up from those who saw the feat. Then, just as we were prepared to go to the fallen deer, a male puma, which is nothing but a cat, though 50 times as big, that had been watching the buck from above, dropped down from the boughs of the ceiba tree on the shoulders of the Prince Guatemoc, felling him to the ground, where he lay face downwards while the fierce brute clawed and bit him in the neck. Indeed, had it not been for his golden cuirass and helm, Guatemoc would never have lived to be Emperor of Anahuac, and perhaps it might have been better so. Now, when they saw the puma snarling and tearing at the person of the prince, though brave men enough, the 3 nobles who were with us were seized by sudden panic and ran, thinking him dead. But I did not run, though I should have been glad enough to do so. At my side hung one of the Indians' weapons that served them instead of swords, a club of wood set both sides with spikes of obsidian, like the teeth of the bill of a swordfish. Snatching it from its loop, I gave the puma battle, striking a blow upon his head that rolled him over and caused the blood to pour. In that moment he was up and roaring with rage. Whirling the wooden sword with both hands, I smote him in mid-air, the blow passing between the open paws and catching him full on the snout and head. So hard was the stroke that my weapon shattered. Still it did not stop the puma. In a second I was cast to the earth with a great shock, and the brute was on me, tearing and biting at my chest and neck. It was well for me at that moment that I wore a garment of quilted cotton, otherwise I might have been ripped open, and even with this covering I was badly torn, and to this day I bear the marks of that beast's claws upon my body. But now when I seemed to be lost, the great blow that I had struck took effect on him, for one of the points of glass had pierced his brain. He lifted his head, his claws contracted themselves in my flesh, then he howled like a dog in pain, and fell dead upon my body. Well, so I lay upon the ground, unable to stir, for I was much hurt, until my companions, having taken heart, came back and pulled the puma off me. By this time Guatemoc, who saw all, but till now was unable to move from lack of breath, had found his feet again. "Teule," he gasped, "you are a brave man indeed, and if you live I swear that I will always stand your friend to the death, as you have stood mine." Oh, thus he spoke to me, but to the others he said nothing, casting no reproaches at them. Then I fainted away. End of chapter 14. Recording by Patrick 79. Chapter 15 of Montezuma's Daughter by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Patrick 79. Chapter 15. The Court of Montezuma. Now, For a week I was so ill from my wounds that I was unable to be moved, and then I must be carried in a litter till we came to within 3 days' journey of the city of Tenochtitlan, or Mexico. After that, as the roads were now better made and cared for than any I have seen in England, I was able to take to my feet again. Of this I was glad, for I have no love of being borne on the shoulders of men after the womanish Indian fashion, and moreover, as we had now come to a cold country, the road running through the vast tablelands and across the tops of mountains, it was no longer necessary as it had been in the hot lands. Never did I see anything more dreary than these immense lengths of desolate plains, covered with aloes and other thorny and succulent scrubs of fantastic aspect, which alone could live on the sandy and waterless soil. Oh, this is a strange land, that can boast 3 separate climates within its borders, and is able to show all the glories of the tropics side by side with deserts of immeasurable expanse. One night we camped in a rest house, of which there were many built along the road for the use of travellers, that was placed almost on the top of the sierra or mountain range which surrounds the valley of Tenochtitlan. Next morning we took the road again before dawn, for the cold was so sharp at that great height that we who had travelled from the hot land could sleep very little, and also Guatemoc desired if it were possible to reach the city by night. When we had gone a few hundred paces, the path came to the crest of the mountain range, and I halted suddenly in wonder and admiration. Below me lay a vast bowl of land and water, of which, however, I could see nothing, for the shadows of the night still filled it. But before me, piercing the very clouds, towered the crest of 2 snow-clad mountains, and on these the light of the unrisen sun played, already changing their whiteness to the stain of blood. Popo, or the hill that smokes, is the name of one, and Ixtac, or the sleeping woman, was that of the other, and no grander sight was ever offered to the eyes of man than they furnished in the hour before dawn. From the lofty summit of Popo went up great columns of smoke which, what with the fire in the hearts and the crimson of the sunrise, looked like rolling pillars of flame, and for the glory of the glittering slopes below, that changed continually from the mystery of white to dull red, from red to crimson, and from crimson to every dazzling hue that the rainbow holds. Who can tell it? Who can even imagine it? None indeed, except those that have seen the sun rise over the volcans of Tenochtitlan. When I had feasted my eyes on Popo, I turned to Ixtac. She is not so lofty as her husband, for so the Aztecs named the volcan Popo, and when first I looked, I could see nothing but the gigantic shape of a woman fashioned in snow, and lying like a corpse with her lofty bier, whose hair streamed down the mountain side. But now the sunbeams caught her also, and she seems to start out in the majesty from a veil of rosy mist. A wonderful and thrilling sight. But beautiful as she was then, still I loved the sleeping woman best at eve. Then she lies a shape of glory on the blackness beneath, and is slowly swallowed up in the solemn night as the dark draws its veil across her. Now as I gazed, the light began to creep down the sides of the volcans, revealing the forests on their flanks. But still the vast valley was filled with mist that lay in dense billows resembling those of the sea, through which hills and temple tops started up like islands. By slow degrees, as we passed upon our downward road, the vapours cleared away, and the lakes of Tezcuco and Chalco and Xochicalco shone in the moonlight like giant mirrors. On their banks stood many cities. Indeed, the greatest of these, Mexico, seemed to float upon the waters. Beyond them and about them were green fields of corn and aloe, and groves of forest trees, while far away towered the black wall of rock that hedges in the valley. All day we journeyed swiftly through this fairyland. We passed through the cities of Amaquem and Ajochinco, which I will not stay to describe, and many a lovely village that nestled upon the borders of Lake Chalco. Then we entered on the great causeway of stone, built like a road resting on the waters, and with the afternoon we came to the town of Cuitlahuac. Thence we passed on to Ixtapalapan and there Guatemoc. And here Guatemoc would have rested for the night in the royal house of his uncle Cuitlahuac. But when we reached the town we found that Montezuma, who had been advised of our approach by runners, had sent orders that we were to push on to Tenochtitlan, and that palanquins had been made ready to bear us. So we entered the palanquins, and leaving that lovely city of gardens, were borne swiftly along the southern causeway. On we went past towns built upon piles fixed at the bottom of the lake, past gardens that were laid out in reeds and floated over the waters like a boat, past teocallis and glistening temples without number, through streets of light canoes and thousands of Indians going to and fro about their business, till at length towards sunset we reached the battlemented fort that is called Xoloc, which stands upon the dike. I say stands, but alas, it stands no more. Cortes destroyed it, and with it all those glorious cities which my eyes beheld that day. At Xoloc we began to enter the city of Tenochtitlan, or Mexico, the mightiest city that ever I have seen. The houses on the outskirts indeed were built of mud or adobe, but those on the richer parts were constructed of red stone. Each house surrounded a courtyard and was in turn surrounded by a garden, while between them ran canals having footpaths on either side. Then there were squares, and in the squares pyramids, palaces, and temples without end. I gazed on them till I was bewildered, but all seemed as nothing when at length I saw the great temple with its stone gateways opening to the north and to the south, the east and the west, its walls carven everywhere with serpents, its polished pavements, its teocallis decked with human skulls, thousands upon thousands of them, and its vast surrounding tianquez, or marketplace. I caught but a glimpse of it then, for the darkness was falling, and afterwards we were borne on through the darkness, but I did not know whither. A while went by and I saw that we had left the city and were passing up a steep hill beneath the shadow of mighty cedar trees. Presently we halted in a courtyard, and here I was bidden to alight. Then the Prince Guatemoc led me into a wondrous house, of which all the roofs were roofed with cedar wood, and its walls hung with richly coloured cloths, and in that house gold seemed as plentiful as bricks and oak are with us in England. Led by domestics who bore cedar wands in their hands, we went through many passages and rooms, till at length we came upon a chamber where other domestics were awaiting us, who washed us with scented waters and clothed us in gorgeous apparel. Thence they conducted us to the door, where we were bidden to remove our shoes, and a coarse-coloured robe was given to each of us to hide our splendid dress. The robes having been put on, we were suffered to pass the door, and found ourselves in a vast chamber in which were many noble men and women, all standing and clad in coarse robes. At the far end of this chamber was a gilded screen, and from behind it floated, sounds of sweet, sweet music. Now, as we stood in the great chamber that was lighted with sweet-smelling torches, many men advanced and greeted Guatemoc the prince, and I noticed that all of them looked upon me curiously. Presently a woman came, and I saw that her beauty was great. She was tall and stately, and beneath her rough outer robe splendidly attired in worked and jewelled garments. Weary and bewildered as I was, her loveliness seized me as it were in a vice. Never before had I seen such loveliness. For her eye was proud and full like the eye of a buck. Her curling hair fell upon her shoulders, and her features were very noble, yet tender, almost to sadness, though at times she could seem fierce enough. This lady was yet in her first youth. Perchance she may have seen some 18 years, but her shape was that of a full-grown woman and most royal. "Greetings, Guatemoc, my cousin," she said in a sweet voice. "So you are come at last. My royal father has awaited you for long and will ask questions as to your delay. My sister and your wife has wondered also why you tarried." Now, as I spoke, I felt rather sore that this lady was searching me with her eyes. "Greetings, Otomy, my cousin," answered the prince. "I have been delayed by the accidents of travel. Tabasco is far away, also my charge and companion, Teule," and he nodded towards me, "met with an accident on the road." "What was the accident?" she asked. "Only this, that he saved me from the jaws of a puma at the risk of his life, when all the others fled from me, and was somewhat hurt in the deed. He saved me thus," and in a few words he told the story. She listened, and I saw her eyes sparkled at the tale. When it was done she spoke again, and this time to me. "Welcome, Teule," she said, smiling. "You are not of our people, yet my heart goes out to such a man," and still smiling she left us. "Who is that great lady?" I asked Guatemoc. "Oh, that is my cousin Otomy, the princess of the Otomy, my uncle Montezuma's favourite daughter," he answered. "She likes you, Teule, and that is well for you for many reasons. Now hush." As he spoke, the screen at the far end of the chamber was drawn aside. Beyond it a man sat upon a broidered cushion who was inhaling the fumes of the tobacco weed from a gilded pipe of wood after the Indian fashion. This man, who was no other than the monarch Montezuma, was of a tall build and melancholy countenance, having a very pale face for one of his nation, and thin black hair. He was dressed in a white robe of the purest cotton, and wore a golden belt and sandals set with pearls, and on his head a plume of feathers of the royal green. Behind him were a band of beautiful girls, somewhat slightly clothed, some of whom played on flutes and other instruments of music, and on the other side stood 4 ancient counsellors, all of them barefooted and clad in the coarsest garments. So soon as the screen was drawn, all the company in the chamber prostrated themselves upon their knees, an example that I hastened to follow, and thus they remained till the emperor made a sign with the gilded bowl of his pipe, when they rose to their feet again, and stood with folded hands and eyes fixed abjectly upon the floor. Presently Montezuma made another signal, and 3 aged men, whom I understood to be ambassadors, advanced and asked some prayers of him. He answered them with a nod of the head, and they retreated from his presence, making obeisance and stepping backwards till they mingled with the crowd. Then the emperor spoke a word to one of the counsellors, who bowed and came slowly down the hall, looking to the right and to the left. Presently his eye fell upon Guatemoc, and indeed He was easy to see, for he stood a head taller than any there. "Hail, Prince," he said. "The royal Montezuma desires to speak with you, and with the Teule, your companion." "Do as I do, Teule," said Guatemoc, and led the way up the chamber, till we reached the place where the wooden screen had been, which, as we passed it, was drawn behind us, shutting us off from the hall. Here we stood a while, with folded hands and downcast eyes, till a signal was made to us to advance. "Your report, nephew," said Montezuma in a low voice of command. "I went to the city of Tabasco, O glorious Montezuma. I found the Teule and brought him hither. Also I caused the high priest to be sacrificed according to the royal command, and now I hand back the imperial signet." And he gave the ring to a counsellor. "Why did you delay so long upon the road, nephew?" "Because of the chances of the journey. While saving my life, royal Montezuma, the Teule, my prisoner, was bitten by a puma. Its skin is brought to you as an offering." Now Montezuma looked at me for the first time, then opened a picture scroll that one of his counsellors handed to him, and read in it, glancing at me from time to time. "The description is good," he said at length, "in all save one thing. It does not say that this prisoner is the handsomest man in Anahuac. Say, Teule, why have your countrymen landed on my dominions and slain my people?" "I know nothing of it, O king," I answered, as well as I might with the help of Guatemoc, "and they are not my countrymen." "The report says that you confess to having blood of those Teules in your veins, and that you came to these shores, or near them, in one of your great canoes." "Oh, that is so, O king, yet I am not of their people, and I came to the shore floating on a barrel." "I hold that you lie," answered Montezuma frowning, "for the sharks and crocodiles would devour one who swam thus." Then he added anxiously, "Say, are you the descendants of Quetzal?" "I do not know, O king. I am of a white race, and our forefather was Adam." "Perchance that is another name for Quetzal," he said. "It has long been prophesied that his children would return, and now it seems that the hour of their coming is at hand." And he sighed heavily, then added, "Go now. Tomorrow you shall tell me of these Teules, and the council of the priests shall decide your fate." Now when I heard the name of the priests, I trembled in my bones and cried, clasping my hands in supplication, "Slay me if you will, O king, but I beseech you deliver me not again into the hands of the priests." "We are all in the hands of the priests, who are the mouth of God," he answered coldly. "Besides, I have told you that you have lied to me." Then I went, foreboding evil, and Guatemoc also looked downcast. Bitterly did I curse the hour when I had said that I was Spanish blood, and yet no Spaniard. Had I known even what I know now, torture would not have wrung those words from me. But now it was too late. Now Guatemoc led me to certain apartments of this palace of Chapultepec, where his wife, the royal princess Tecuichpo, was waiting him, a very lovely lady, and with her other ladies, among them the Princess Otomie, Montezuma's daughter, and some nobles. Here a rich repast was served to us, and I was seated next to the Princess Otomie, who spoke to me most graciously, asking me many things concerning my land and the people of the Teules. It was from her that I learned first that the emperor was much disturbed at heart because these Teules, or Spaniards, for he was superstitious, and held them to be the children of the god Quetzal, who according to ancient prophecy would come to take the land. Indeed, so gracious was she, and so royally lovely, that for the first time I felt my heart stirred by another woman than my betrothed whom I had left far away in England, and whom, as I thought, I should never see again. And as I learned in after days, mine was not the only heart that was stirred that night. Near to us sat another royal lady, Papantzin, the sister of Montezuma, but she was neither young nor lovely, and yet most sweet-faced, and sad as though with the passage of death. Indeed, she died not many weeks after, but she could not rest quiet in her grave, as shall be told. When the feast was done and we had drunk of the cocoa or chocolate, and smoked tobacco in pipes, a strange but most soothing custom that I learned in Tabasco, and of which I had never been able to break myself, though the weed is still hard to come by here in England, I was led to my sleeping place, a small chamber panelled with cedar boards. For a while I could not sleep, for I was overcome by the memory of all strange sights that I had seen in this wonderful new land, which was so civilized and yet so barbarous. I thought of that sad-faced king, the absolute lord of millions, surrounded by all that the heart of man can desire, by vast wealth, by hundreds of lovely wives, by loving children, by countless armies, by all the glory of the arts, ruling over the fairest empire on earth, with every pleasure to his hand, a god in all things save his mortality, and worshipped as a god, and yet a victim to fear and superstition, and more heavy-hearted than the meanest slave about his palaces. Here was a lesson such as Solomon would have loved to show, for with Solomon this Montezuma may cry, "I gathered me also silver and gold, and the peculiar treasure of kings and of the provinces. I gat me men singers and women singers, and the delights of the sons of men, and the musical instruments, and that of all sorts. And whatsoever my eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy. And behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun." So he might have cried. So, indeed, he did cry in other words, for, as the paintings of the skeletons and the three monarchs that is upon the north wall of the aisle of Ditchingham Church shows forth so aptly, kings have their fates, and happiness is not to them more than to any of the other sons of men. Indeed, it is not at all, as my benefactor Fonseca once said to me. True happiness is but a dream, from which we awake continually to the sorrows of our short laborious day. Then my thoughts flew to the vision of that most lovely maid, the Princess Otomy, who, as I believed, had looked on me so kindly, and I found that vision sweet, for I was young, and the English lily, my own love, was far away and lost to me for ever. Was it then wonderful that I should find this Indian poppy fair? Indeed, where is the man who would not have been overcome by her sweetness, her beauty, and that stamp of royal grace which comes with kingly blood and the daily exercise of power? Like the rich wonders of the robe she wore, her very barbarism, of which now I saw but the better side, drew and dazzled my mind's eye, giving her woman's tenderness some new quality, sombre and strange, an Eastern richness which is lacking in our well-schooled English women, that at one and the same stroke touch both the imagination of the senses, and through them enthrall the heart. For Otomy seems such woman as men dream of but very rarely win, seeing that the world has few such natures, and fewer nurseries where they can be reared. At once pure and passionate, of royal blood and heart, rich-natured and most womanly, yet brave as a man and beautiful as the night, with a mind athirst for knowledge and a spirit that no sorrows could avail to quell, ever changing in her outer moods, and yet most faithful with the honour of a man. Such was Otomy, Montezuma's daughter, princess of the Otomy. Was it wonderful then that I found her fair, or when fate gave me her love, that at last I loved her in turn? And yet there was that in her nature which should have held me back, had I but known of it. For with all her charm, her beauty, and her virtues, at heart she was still a savage, and strive as she would to hide it, at times her blood would master her. But as I lay on the chamber of the palace of Chapultepec, the tramp of the guards upon my door reminded me that I had little now to do with love and other delights, I whose life hung from day to day upon a hair. Tomorrow the priests would decide my fate, and when the priests were judges, the prisoner might know the sentence before it was spoken. I was a stranger and a white man. Surely such a one would prove an offering more acceptable to the gods than that furnished by the 1,000 Indian hearts. I had been snatched from the altars of Tabasco that I might grace the higher altars of Tenochtitlan, and that was all. My fate would be to perish miserably far from my home, and in this world never to be heard of more. Musing thus sadly as I slept, when I woke the sun was up. Rising from my mat, I went to the wood-barred window place and looked through. The palace whence I gazed was placed on the crest of a rocky hill. On one side this hill was bathed by the blue waters of Texcoco. On the other, a mile or more away, rose the temple towers of Mexico. Along the slopes of the hill, and in some directions for a mile from its base, grew huge cedars, from the boughs of which hung a grey and ghostly-looking moss. These trees were so large that the smallest of them is bigger than the best oak in the parish of Ditchingham, while the greatest measures 22 paces round the base. Beyond and between these marvellous and ancient trees were the gardens of Montezuma, that with their gorgeous flowers, their marble baths, their aviaries and wild beast dens, were, as I believe, the most wonderful in the world. At the least, I thought to myself, even if I must die, it is something to have seen this country of Anahuac, its kings, its customs, and its people. End of chapter 15. Recording by Patrick 79. Chapter 16 of Montezuma's Daughter by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Patrick 79. Chapter 16. Thomas becomes a god. Little did I, plain Thomas Wingfield, gentleman, know when I rose that morning that before sunset I should be a god, and after Montezuma the emperor, the most honoured man, or rather god, in the city of Mexico. It came about thus. When I had breakfast with the household of the Prince Guatemoc, I was led to the hall of justice, which was named the Tribunal of God. Here on a golden throne sat Montezuma, administering justice in such pomp as I cannot describe. About him were his counsellors and great lords, and before him was placed a human skull, crowned with emeralds so large that a blaze of light went up from them. In his hand also he held an arrow for a sceptre. Certain chiefs or caciques were on their trial for treason. nor were they left long in doubt of their fate. For when some evidence had been heard, they were asked what they had to say in their defence. Each of them told his tale in few words and short. Then Montezuma, who till now had said and done nothing, took the painted scroll of the indictment and pricked it with the arrow in his hand, where the picture of each prisoner appeared upon the scroll. Then they were led away to death, but how they died I do not know. When this trial was finished, certain priests entered the hall clothed in sable robes, their matted hair hanging down their backs. Oh, they were fierce, wild-eyed men of great dignity, and I shivered when I saw them. I noticed also that they alone made small reverence to the majesty of Montezuma. The councillors and nobles having fallen back, these priests entered into talk with the emperor, and presently two of them came forward and, taking me from the custody of the guards, led me forward before the throne. Then of a sudden I was commanded to strip myself of my garments, and this I did with little or no shame, till I stood naked before them all. Now the priest came forward and examined every part of me closely. On my arms were the scars left by de Garcia's sword, and on my breast the scarcely healed marks of the puma's teeth and claws. These wounds were scanned, asking how I had come by them. I told them, and thereupon they carried on a discussion among themselves, and out of my hearing, which grew so warm that at length they appealed to the emperor to decide the point. He thought a while, and I heard him say, "These blemishes do not come from within the body, nor were they upon it at birth, but they have been inflicted by the violence of man and beast." Then the priests consulted together again, and presently their leader spoke some words into the ear of Montezuma. He nodded, and rising from his throne came towards me, who stood naked and shivering before him, for the air of Mexico is keen. As he advanced, he loosed a chain of emeralds and gold that hung about his neck, and unclasped the royal cloak from his shoulders. Then with his own hand he put the chain upon my throat, and cloak upon my shoulders, and having humbly bent the knee before me, as though in adoration, he cast his arms about me and embraced me. "Hail, most blessed," he said, "divine son of Quetzal, holder of the spirit of Tezcat, soul of the world, creator of the world. What have we done that you should honour us thus with your presence for a season? What can we do to pay your honour back? You created us and all this country. Behold, while you tarry with us, it is yours, and we are nothing but your servants. Order, and your command shall be obeyed. Think, and your thought shall be executed before it can pass your lips. O Tezcat, I, Montezuma, your servant, offer you my adoration, and through me the adoration of all my people." And again he bowed the knee. "We adore you, O Tezcat," chimed the priests. Now I remained silent and bewildered. For all of this foolery I could understand nothing, and while I stood thus Montezuma clapped his hands, and women entered bearing beautiful clothing with them, and a wreath of flowers. The clothing they put upon my body, and the wreath of flowers on my head, worshipping me the while and saying, "Tezcat, who died yesterday, is come today. Be joyful, Tezcat has come again in the body of the captive Teule." Then I understand that I was now a god, and the greatest of gods, though at that moment within myself I felt more of a fool than I had ever been before. And now men appeared, grave and reverend in appearance, bearing lutes in their hands. I was told that these were my tutors, and with them a train of royal pages who were to be my servants. They led me forth from the hall, making music as they went, and before me marched a herald, calling out that this was the god Tezcat, soul of the world, creator of the world, who had come again to visit his people. Oh, they led me through all the courts and endless chambers of the palace, and wherever I went, man, woman and child bowed themselves to the earth before me, and worshipped me, Thomas Wingfield of Ditchingham in the county of Norfolk, till I thought that I must be mad. Then they placed me in a litter and carried me down the hill Chapultepec, and along causeways and through streets, till we came to the great square of the temple. Before me went heralds and priests, after me followed pages and nobles, and ever as we passed the multitudes prostrated themselves, till I began to understand how wearisome a thing it is to be a god. Next they carried me through the wall of serpents, and up the winding paths of the mighty teocalli, till we reached the summit, where the temples and idols stood, and here a great drum beat, and the priests sacrificed victim after victim in my honour, and I grew sick with the sight of wickedness and blood. Presently they invited me to descend from the litter, laying rich carpets and flowers for my feet to tread on, and I was much afraid, for I thought that they were about to sacrifice me to myself or to some other divinity. But this was not so. They led me to the edge of the pyramid, or as near as I could go, for I shrank back lest they should seize me suddenly and cast me over the edge. And there the high priest called out my dignity to the thousands who were assembled beneath, and every one of them bent their knee in adoration of me, the priests above and the multitudes below. And so it went on till I grew dizzy with the worship, and the shouting, and the sounds of music, and the sights of death, and very thankful was I when at last they carried me back to Chapultepec. Here new honours awaited me, and I was conducted to a splendid range of apartments, next to those of the emperor himself, and I was told that all Montezuma's household were at my command, and that he who refused to do my bidding should die. So at last I spoke, and said it was my bidding that I should be suffered to rest a while, till a feast was prepared for me in the apartments of Guatemoc the prince, for there I hoped to meet Otomie. My tutors and nobles who attended me answered that Montezuma, my servant, had trusted that I would feast with him that night, till my command should be done. Then they left me, saying that they would come again in an hour to lead me to the banquet. Now I threw off the emblems of my godhead and cast myself down on cushions to rest and think, and a certain exultation took possession of me. For was I not a god, and had I not power absolute? Still, being of a cautious mind, I wondered why I was a god, and how long my power would last. Before the hour had gone by, pages and nobles entered, bearing new robes, which were put upon my body, and fresh flowers to crown my head, and I was led away to the apartments of Guatemoc, fair women going before me who plied upon their instruments of music. Here Guatemoc the prince waited to receive me, which he did as though I, his captive and companion, was the first of kings, and yet I thought that I saw merriment in his eye, mingled with sorrow. Bending forward, I spoke to him in a whisper. "What does all this mean, prince?" I said. "Am I befooled, or am I indeed a god?" "Hush!" he answered, bowing low and speaking beneath his breath. "It means both good and ill for you, my friend Teule. Another time I will tell you." Then he added aloud, "Does it please you, O Tezcat, god of gods, that we should sit at meat with you, or will you eat alone? The gods like good company, Prince," I said. Now during this talk I had discovered that among these gathered in the hall was the Princess Otomy. So when we passed to the low table around which we were to sit on cushions, I hung back, watching where she would place herself, and then at once seated myself beside her. This caused some little confusion among the company, for the place of honour had been prepared for me at the head of the table, the seat of Guatemoc being to my right, and that of his wife, the royal Tecuichpo, to my left. "Your seat is yonder, O Tezcat," she said, blushing beneath her olive skin as she spoke. "Surely a god may sit where he chooses, royal Otomy," I answered. "Besides," I answered in a low voice, "what better place can he find than by the side of the most lovely goddess on the earth?" Again she blushed and answered, "Oh, alas, I no goddess, but only a mortal maid. Listen, if you desire that I should be your companion at our feast, you must issue it as a command. None will dare to disobey you, not even Montezuma, my father." So I rose and said in very halting Aztec to the nobles who waited on me, "It is my will that my place shall be always set at the side of Princess Otomy." At these words Otomy blushed even more, and a murmur went round among the guests, while Guatemoc first looked angry and then laughed, but the nobles, my attendants, bowed and their spokesman answered, "The words of Tezcat shall be obeyed. Let the seat of Otomy, the royal princess, the favoured of Tezcat, be placed by the side of the god." Afterwards this was always done, except when I ate with Montezuma himself. Moreover, the Princess Otomy became known throughout the city as the blessed princess that favoured Tezcat, for so strong a hold had custom and superstition upon this people that they thought it the greatest of honours to her, who was among the first ladies in the land, that he who for a little space was supposed to hold the spirit of the soul of the world, should deign to desire her companionship when he ate. Now the feast went on, and presently I made shift to ask Otomy what all this might mean. "Alas," she whispered, "you do not know, nor dare I tell you now, but I will say this. Though you who are a god may sit where you will today, an hour will come when you must lie where you would not. Listen, when we have finished eating, say that it is your wish to walk in the gardens of the palace and that I should accompany you. Then I may find a chance to speak." Accordingly, when the feast was over, I said that I desired to walk in the gardens with the Princess Otomy, and we went out and wandered under the solemn trees that are draped in the winding sheet of grey moss which, hanging from every bough as though the forest had been decked with the white beards of an army of aged men, waved and rustled sadly in the keen night air. But alas, we might not be alone, for after us at a distance of 20 paces followed all my crowd of attendant nobles, together with fair dancing girls and minstrels armed with accursed flutes, on which they blew in season and out of it, dancing as they blew. In vain did I command them to be silent, telling them that it was written of old that there is a time to play and dance and a time to cease from dancing, for in this alone they would not obey me. Never could I be at peace because of them, then or thereafter, and not till now did I learn how great a treasure is solitude. Still we were allowed to walk together under the trees, and though the clamour of music pursued us wherever we went, we were soon deep in talk. Then it was I learned how dreadful was the fate which overshadowed me. "No, O Teule," said Otomy, for she would call me by the old name when there was none to hear. This is the custom of our land, that every year a young captive should be chosen, the earthly image of the god Tezcat, who created the world. Only two things are necessary to this captive, namely, that his blood should be noble, and that his person should be beautiful, and without flaw or blemish. The day that you came hither, Teule, chanced to be the day of choosing a new captive to personate the god, and you have been chosen because you are both noble and more beautiful than any man in Anahuac, and also because, being of the people of the Teules, the children of Quetzal, of whom so many rumours have reached us, and whose coming my father Montezuma dreads more than anything in the world, it was thought by the priest that you may avert their anger from us, and the anger of the gods." Now Otomie paused, as one who has something to say that she can scarcely find words to fit, but I, remembering only what had been said, swelled inwardly with the sense of my own greatness, and because this lovely princess had declared that I was the most beautiful man in Anahuac, I who, though I was well looking enough, had never before been called beautiful by man, woman, or child. But in this case, as in many another, pride went before the fall. "It must be spoken, Teule," Otomie continued. "Alas, that it should be I who am fated to tell you. For a year you will rule as a god in the city of Tenochtitlan, and except for certain ceremonies that you must undergo, and certain arts that you must learn, none will trouble you. Your slightest wish will be law, and when you smile on any, it shall be an omen of good to them, and they will bless you. Even my father Montezuma will treat you with reverence as an equal, or more. Every delight shall be yours except that of marriage, and this will be withheld till the 12th month of the year. Then the 4 most beautiful maidens in the land will be given to you as brides." "And who shall choose them?" I asked. "Nay, I know not, Teule, who do not meddle in such mysteries," she answered hurriedly. "Sometimes the god is judge, and sometimes the priest judge for him. It is as it may chance. Listen now to the end of my tale, and you will surely forget the rest. For 1 month you will live with your wives, and this month you will pass in feasting at all the noblest houses in the city. On the last day of the month, however, you will be placed in a royal barge, and together with your wives paddled across the lake to a place that is named Melting of Metals. Thence you will be led to the teocalli named House of Weapons, where your wives will bid farewell to you for ever. And there, Teule, alas, that I must say it, you are doomed to be offered as a sacrifice to the god whose spirit you hold, the great god Tezcat, for your heart will be torn from your body, and your head will be struck from your shoulders and set upon the stake that is known as Post of Heads." Now when I heard this dreadful doom, I groaned aloud, and my knees trembled so that I almost fell to the ground. Then a great fury seized me, and forgetting my father's counsel, I blasphemed the gods of the country and the people who worship them, first in the Aztec and Maya languages, and then, when my knowledge of these tongues failed me, in Spanish and good English. But Otomie, who heard some of my words and guessed more, was seized with fear and lifted her hands, saying, "Curse not the awful gods, I beseech you, lest some terrible thing befall you at once. If you are overheard, it will be thought that you have an evil spirit, and not a good one, and then you must die now and by torment. At the least the gods who are everywhere will hear you." "Let them hear," I answered. They are false gods, and that country is accursed which worships them. They are doomed, I say, and all their worshippers are doomed. Nay, I care not if I am heard. As well die now by torment as live a year in the torment of approaching death. But I shall not die alone. All the sea of blood that your priests have shed cries out for the vengeance of the true God, and he will avenge. And thus I raved on, being mad with fear and impotent anger, while the Princess Otomy stood terrified and amazed at my blasphemies, and the flutes piped and the dancers danced behind us. And as I raved, I saw that the mind of Otomy wandered from my words, for she was staring towards the east like one who sees a vision. Then I looked also towards the east and saw that the sky was alight there, for from the edge of the horizon to the highest parts of heaven spread a fan of pale and fearful light powdered over the sparks of fire, the handle of the fan resting on the earth as it were, while its wings covered the eastern sky. Now I ceased my cursing and stood transfixed. As I stood, a cry of terror arose from the precincts of the palace, and people poured from every door to gaze upon the portent that flared and blazed in the east. Presently Montezuma himself came out, attended by his great lords, and in that ghastly light I saw that his lips worked and his hands writhed over each other. Nor was the miracle done with, for anon from the clear sky that hung over the city descended a ball of fire, which seemed to rest upon the points of the lofty temple in the great square, lighting up the teocalli as with the glare of day. It vanished, but where it had been another light now burned, for the temple of Quetzal was afire. Now cries of fear and lamentation arose from all who beheld these wonders on the hill of the Chapultepec, and also from the city below. Even I was frightened. I do not know why, for it may be well that the blaze of light which we saw on that and after nights was nothing but the brightness of a comet, and that the fire of the temple was caused by the thunderbolt. But to these people, and more especially to Montezuma, whose mind was filled already with rumours of the coming of the strange white race, as it was truly prophesied, would bring his empire to nothingness, the omen seemed very evil. Indeed, if they had any doubt as to their meaning, it was soon to be dispelled, in their minds at least. For as we stood wonder-struck, a messenger, panting and soiled with travel, arrived among us, and prostrating himself before the majesty of the emperor, he drew a painted scroll from his robe and handed it to an attendant noble. So desirous was Montezuma to know its contents, that contrary to all custom he snatched the roll from the hands of the counsellor, and unrolling it, he began to read the picture writing by the baleful light of the blazing sky and temple. Presently, as we watched and he read, Montezuma groaned aloud, and was casting down the writing he covered his face with his hands. As it chanced, it fell to near where I stood, and I saw painted over it rude pictures of ships of the Spanish rig, and of men in the Spanish armour. Then I understood why Montezuma groaned. The Spaniards had landed on his shores. Now some of his counsellors approached him to console him, but he thrust them aside, saying, "Let me mourn. The doom was foretold is fallen upon the children of Anahuac. The children of Quetzal muster on our shores and slay my people. Let me mourn, I say." At that moment another messenger came from the palace, having grief written on his face. "Speak," said Montezuma. "O king, forgive the tongue that must tell such things. Your royal sister Papantzin was seized with terror at yonder dreadful sight," and he pointed at the heavens. She lies dying in the palace." Now when the emperor heard that his sister, whom he loved, was dying, he said nothing, but covering his face with the royal mantle, he passed slowly back to the palace. And all the while the crimson light gleamed and sparkled in the east like some monstrous and unnatural dawn, while the temple of Quetzal burned fiercely in the city beneath. Now I turned to the Princess Otomie, who had stood by my side throughout, overcome with wonder and trembling. "Did I not say this country was accursed, Princess of the Otomie?" "You said it, Teule," she answered, "and it is accursed." Then we went into the palace, and even in this hour of fear, after me came the minstrels as before. End of chapter 16. Recording by Patrick 79.